Malcolm X once said freedom without economic power is an illusion wearing the mask of progress. He watched men march for rights while their wallets stayed chained. This is the story of the trap he uncovered, the one still closing around millions today. Most documentaries stop at his speeches. This one goes deeper, into the ledgers, the contracts, the fine print nobody read aloud. Malcolm believed the real war was never fought with signs. It was fought with signatures, interest rates, and silence. He called it economic sabotage. Not an accident of history, but a design, engineered so carefully that its victims thanked the architects. Malcolm spent years tracing the wiring beneath the promise of the American dream, and what he found disturbed him. The dream said, work hard, buy a home, open a business, and freedom follows. Malcolm asked a harder question: freedom for whom, and on whose terms? The answer would become the foundation of everything he taught about money and control. Somewhere between the mortgage and the paycheck, a trap had been built. Not made of iron bars, but of paperwork. And it caught people who believed they were finally winning. Malcolm called this the asset trap, and he refused to look away from it. If you feel like you are working harder than ever yet, somehow standing still, you already know this trap personally. Stay with this breakdown because Malcolm mapped its exact architecture, and by the end, you will see it clearly in your own life. In this breakdown, we uncover the blueprint of economic sabotage that Malcolm X exposed decades ago. You will discover why the assets you were told to chase were built to keep you dependent, and the exact rules he laid out to build real sovereignty. 3 pillars held this system together, and Malcolm dismantled each one in public, on stage, in interviews, in the pages he wrote before his death. Together, they form a warning that reads less like history and more like prophecy. The first pillar was debt disguised as opportunity. Malcolm called it the golden handcuffs, a phrase built on the way credit was extended, just wide enough to trap, never wide enough to free. He watched families mistake borrowed comfort for real wealth. In cities across America, Black families were sold homes through something called contract selling. No traditional mortgage, no bank, no equity built along the way. One missed payment and decades of investment vanished overnight, legally, with no recourse offered. Redlining drew invisible borders around entire communities, marking them too risky for real investment. Businesses inside those lines could not get loans on fair terms. Malcolm called this a wall built from ink, quieter than a fence, but just as final. He told audiences plainly that the system does not mind you making money, as long as that money stays tied to its infrastructure. Real assets grant autonomy. Systemic assets, debts disguised as wealth, only grant the system leverage over your behavior. Think of the credit card that feels like power but quietly dictates your choices. Think of the loan that funds a dream but demands obedience in return. Malcolm saw this decades before it wore its modern name, but the design never changed. He argued that debt was never simply a financial tool. It was a leash disguised as a ladder. Climb it, and you feel taller, but you never actually leave the ground. The lender always holds the other end of the rope. Picture the small business owner in 1962, denied a bank loan not for lack of a plan, but for the zip code stamped on his application. Malcolm interviewed men like him, watching ambition collide with a wall no one admitted existed. The tragedy was not only the denial, it was the shame instilled afterward, the quiet belief that failure was personal rather than structural. Malcolm fought against that shame louder than he fought against almost anything else in his public life. He wanted his audience to understand that a trap only works if the trapped believe it is their own fault. Blame turned inward keeps people from organizing outward. This was the psychological engine that powered the entire economic machine. Every generation inherited a version of the same golden handcuffs. Subprime mortgages in the 2000s, predatory auto loans today, buy now, pay later apps quietly rebranding debt as convenience. Malcolm would recognize every one of them instantly. He believed that the first act of rebellion was recognition. See the trap for what it is, and half its power disappears. Stay blind to it, and you will spend your entire life climbing a ladder built to keep you exactly where you started. This is why Malcolm refused to celebrate token financial wins that changed nothing structurally. A raise that funds more debt is not progress. A loan that deepens dependency is not opportunity. He measured freedom only by what could not be repossessed. By the mid-1960s, his economic philosophy had sharpened into something closer to a warning label. Do not confuse access with ownership. Do not confuse a longer leash with liberty. The distance from the collar does not remove the collar. This first pillar alone explains why so many families work their entire lives yet pass down little beyond bills. Malcolm wanted better for the next generation, and that meant naming the trap out loud, without flinching, no matter how uncomfortable the truth became. If this breakdown is reshaping how you see your own finances, take a moment now to like this video and subscribe. This channel exists to uncover the hidden architecture behind history, the parts most documentaries leave out entirely. Drop a comment below with the word sovereignty if you have ever felt the golden handcuffs tighten around your own life. Now, let's move into the second pillar, the one Malcolm called the corporate pacifier. And it may be the most uncomfortable one yet. The second pillar was inclusion without ownership. Malcolm watched corporations and institutions open their doors just wide enough to let a few in, and he named this gesture for what it truly was, a pacifier, not a solution. He grew deeply skeptical of programs that offered high salaries and prestigious titles while leaving the actual structures of power completely untouched. Being paid well inside someone else's machine, he argued, is still a form of dependency, just a more comfortable one. Malcolm often repeated a simple test. If your income can be turned off by someone else because they dislike your opinion, your voice, or your politics, you are not wealthy. You are simply on a longer, more expensive leash than before. He pointed to executives and professionals who had climbed impressively high, only to discover their security evaporated the moment they challenged the institution feeding them. Their comfort was conditional, and conditional comfort, Malcolm insisted, was never true freedom. This was the fallacy of token inclusion. A single seat at the table does not redesign the table, the room, or who built it. Malcolm believed representation without redistribution of actual power was theater dressed up as progress. He watched integration efforts celebrate the first Black executive, the first Black homeowner in a new neighborhood, the first Black graduate of an elite program, all while the underlying economic architecture remained precisely as unequal as before. True wealth, he taught, is not a high salary. It is ownership, self-reliance, and the ability to walk away from any single employer, contract, or institution without your entire life collapsing. Very few people, then or now, meet that bar. Malcolm distrusted the idea that a well-paying job inside the existing system could ever substitute for building something independent outside it. A gilded cage, he argued, is still measured by its bars, no matter how comfortable the interior feels. Consider the modern equivalent, the high-earning employee whose entire livelihood depends on a single company's approval, a single platform's algorithm, a single institution's continued goodwill. Malcolm's critique of dependency did not expire with his death. It multiplied. He believed that dependency dressed in a nice suit was still dependency. The paycheck could be generous, the office could be impressive, but if the entire structure could vanish at someone else's discretion, the worker had built nothing that was truly theirs. This pillar cut deeper than the first because it targeted pride. People who believed they had escaped the trap through hard work and achievement were often still standing squarely inside it, just in a nicer, quieter, better decorated room. Malcolm's answer was not to reject opportunity when it appeared. It was to refuse to mistake opportunity for ownership. Take the job if it serves your larger plan, he taught, but never let the job become the entire plan. He wanted his audience to ask a piercing question of their own lives. If everything you have built could disappear tomorrow because one person or one institution changed their mind about you, what have you actually built at all? This question haunted many who heard him speak, because the honest answer was often uncomfortable. Malcolm intended exactly that discomfort. He believed clarity, however painful, was the only starting point for anyone serious about building real independence. The third pillar was Malcolm's answer to everything the first two pillars exposed. He called for what can best be understood as a separation protocol, pooling resources, supporting independent enterprises, and building ecosystems no outside institution could switch off. This was not abstract theory to him. Malcolm pointed to specific models, community-owned stores, pooled investment funds, mutual aid networks that kept dollars circulating inside a community many times before ever leaving it entirely. He studied how other groups in America had built generational wealth this way, through tightly networked economic loyalty. And he asked why the same discipline could not be applied deliberately, urgently, and without any apology whatsoever. Malcolm's later speeches grew increasingly tactical, almost like blueprints. Stop funding the structures that profit from your dependency, he urged, Every dollar spent outside the community was a dollar that could never return to strengthen it. This required a difficult shift, moving from pure consumerism toward aggressive, localized production and ownership. Malcolm was not asking for boycotts alone. He was asking for construction, for building alternatives rather than only rejecting existing ones. He envisioned neighborhoods where the grocer, the landlord, the lender, and the employer were accountable to the same community they served, rather than distant shareholders with no stake in that community's survival or well-being whatsoever. Malcolm understood this was slower, harder, and less immediately gratifying than accepting a seat at someone else's table. But he believed durability mattered more than speed. A trap escaped quickly can simply be walked back into later. He warned that this third pillar would be the hardest to build, precisely because it required patience and unity in a culture engineered to reward instant individual gain. Community capital could not be built by individuals racing each other. Malcolm's economic nationalism, as it came to be known, was ultimately about control, not isolation. Control over supply, over credit, over the terms of one's own labor. Sovereignty, in his framework, was always economic before it was ever purely political. He believed that political rights without economic foundations were fragile, easily reversed, easily hollowed out from beneath. A vote could be cast, but a debt still had to be paid, and the debt often outlasted the ballot's promise. This third pillar remains his most demanding challenge to modern audiences. It asks not just for awareness of the trap, but for the harder work of building something durable enough to replace it, brick by brick, dollar by dollar. Malcolm never claimed this reconstruction would be easy or quick. He simply insisted it was necessary, because awareness without construction changes nothing. You cannot think your way out of a trap. You must build your way out of it. Now step away from the 1960s and look directly at your own life today. Malcolm's three pillars were never only historical artifacts. They are a diagnostic tool, and it is time to apply it honestly to where you currently stand. Ask yourself the first question honestly. Are you building independent leverage, or are you quietly accumulating systemic assets, debts disguised as milestones that only deepen your dependency on institutions with no real loyalty to you whatsoever? Ask yourself the second question. If the platform, the employer, or the institution funding your current lifestyle disappeared tomorrow, or simply decided they no longer approved of you, would your foundation hold, or would it collapse entirely overnight? Ask yourself the third question. Where does your money actually go once it leaves your hands? And how much of it ever circulates back to strengthen the community, the people, or the causes that shaped who you are? This is the modern wealth trap Malcolm warned about decades before it wore its current disguises, chasing superficial markers of status while remaining entirely vulnerable to systemic shifts you cannot control, predict, or influence in any meaningful way. The uncomfortable truth is that most people fail all three questions, not from laziness, but from a system engineered so precisely that even intelligent, hardworking people mistake its traps for its ladders. Malcolm saw this clearly, and now, so do you. Malcolm's ultimate economic legacy was never simply financial advice. It was a personal development framework disguised as economics. True wealth, in his vision, functions as a defensive shield for your mind, your voice, and your freedom. He taught that the goal was never accumulation for its own sake. The goal was insulation, building a life sturdy enough that no single institution, employer, or algorithm could hold your survival hostage to your silence or your obedience. This is Malcolm's cold, tactical roadmap distilled to its essence. Build assets that cannot be repossessed by someone else's decision. Diversify your dependence until no single source holds total power over your circumstances. Circulate your resources back toward collective strength. He believed this roadmap was available to anyone willing to trade comfort for clarity, willing to see the golden handcuffs, the corporate pacifier, and the consumerism trap for exactly what they were, obstacles disguised as achievements. If this breakdown changed how you see the assets in your own life, make sure you are subscribed, because this channel continues uncovering the economic blueprints hidden inside history's most misunderstood figures, one deep dive at a time. Share this video with someone still climbing a ladder they have not yet questioned. Malcolm believed liberation spreads through recognition, one person at a time, one honest conversation at a time, one broken illusion at a time. Malcolm X did not live to finish building the world. His economic vision demanded. That work remains unfinished, waiting for anyone willing to see the trap clearly, refuse its comfort, and begin building something no one else can switch off.